Summary of Running in the Family by Michael Ondaatje. The autobiography of Michael Ondaatje is split into 7 parts that are grouped by topic instead of time frame. The memoir starts with Ondaatje having a bad dream about his father, Mervin, while he is living in Canada. In the dream, Mervin is in the woods with mean dogs thrashing around him. When Ondaatje wakes up, he finds out that he has no idea who his real father was or much about his family background. He feels like he skipped over his childhood as an adult and doesn't understand the world or the people he came from. Because of this, he makes 2 trips back to Ceylon with his sister Gillian. Gillian and Ondaatje get together with Aunt Phyllis and other old cousins. They talk about memories and stories from the past, especially about Ondaatje's parents. Ondaatje talks about his parents' childhood in the 1920s and 1930s in the second part. When Mervin is 18, his rich parents send him to college at Cambridge. For 2 years, Mervin lies to them by saying that he is in college when he's really been spending the money on fancy rooms and parties. When Mervin's family goes to England to face him directly and angrily, he quickly gets engaged to a respectable English woman to avoid their anger. Mervin asks Doris Gratian to marry him instead 2 weeks later, when he gets back to Ceylon. This makes his parents very angry. After a year, they get married. Mervin and Doris spend most of their early adulthood drinking, dancing, gambling, and having affairs, just like all of their rich friends did at the time. They stay wild and spoiled. After Mervin's close friend Francis drowns and dies while drunk, the parties wind down. However, Mervin will drink for the rest of his life and waste his father Philip's money until he dies. In the third part, Ondaatje talks about the past of colonialism and foreigners coming to Ceylon, including his own Dutch ancestors in 1600. When Gillian and Ondaatje go to an old church, they find the graves of many of their relatives who were important people in their country's history. Ondaatje is critical of the Europeans who came to the country and took away its natural riches and beauty, even though he is Dutch. There are songs and other works by English and Ceylonese authors that are very negative about the colonizers. As a Sri Lankan Canadian, Ondaatje feels like he is both a foreigner and a prodigal who hates the foreigner. In the fourth part, Ondaatje goes to see his Aunt Dolly. Aunt Dolly talks about the past with Ondaatje and tells him about Mervin and especially Ondaatje's grandma Lala. Lala gets married to Willie Gratian, who is kind but also very determined. Lala is able to do well for herself after Willie dies. She runs her own dairy farm and becomes known as an oddball society. Lala loves being the center of attention, and she loves being loved by others. However, her own children don't seem to get along well with her. She spends a lot of time with her brother Veer now that her kids are grown up. When Lala's dairy farm goes bankrupt and she has to sell it, she moves around a lot, staying with different people for days or weeks at a time. Even when she is in her 60s, she still parties, steals flowers, and has affairs. When Lala is 68, she finds some money. She and Veer take a car trip into the woods and drink and play cards for days. She knows that her life is coming to an end soon. After being drunk for days, Lala walks out the door and into a flash flood. The flood takes her down the mountain and drowns her. In the fifth part, Ondaatje talks about how the nature and wild animals in Ceylon feel. He tells them about the smells and sounds and records the bird calls in the bush. His wife and kids go with him as he drives into the bush and camps in a bungalow for a few days. The place he and his brothers used to live, Rock Hill, is where he takes his family. Ondaatje talks about Mervin's middle years while they are traveling around Ceylon together. This is when Ondaatje's brothers were very young and Ondaatje himself had not yet been born. Mervin gets into the habit of going on long trips and getting very drunk, which makes him act more and more crazy and insane. He takes a fellow officer's gun and several times takes over trains, which slows them for hours. At one point, he is sure that the Japanese have hidden bombs on the train, so he stops the train with a pistol and throws 25 pots of curd into the river, thinking that he has just stopped a huge military plan. In one episode, Mervin takes off all of his clothes, jumps off the train, and runs into the tunnel ahead of it, wanting to get hit and die. He stays there for hours until his wife of 6 years, Doris, comes after him in the dark and talks him out of going home. In the 6th part, Ondaatje goes to see his half-sister Susan and tells her stories about Mervin and Doris's later years. Doris is loud and dramatic, while Mervin is quiet and private. But when Mervin is sober, they are very close and both have a dark sense of humor. But Mervin's drinking outbursts always cause trouble, and Doris often gets her 3 older kids to help her try to get Mervin to stop. Doris leaves her husband of 14 years with the kids, but no money or help. She works at a hotel to support herself and her kids. In the future, one of the brothers says that their childhood was a nightmare. When Ondaatje was a baby, his family was still together. Since his father has been gone for most of his life, he feels a sense of loss that he doesn't fully understand until he is an adult. Ondaatje talks about Mervin's later years in the last part. At one point, Mervin spends the whole day in the hotel where Doris works, waiting for her to come talk to him so they can make things right. What if she doesn't? Mervin goes home to drink and think about all the things he's lost in his life. During the last few years of Mervin's life, Ondaatje writes down many thoughts of him. Jennifer, Mervin's daughter from his second marriage, remembers when the chicken farm did well. When he wasn't drunk, Mervin was a loving, kind, and caring dad. He was terrible when he was drunk though, so Jennifer learned to just hide when that happened. Mervin's 2 best friends remember that he was mentally sharp even when he was old and started the Salon Cactus and Succulent Society. But in his last year, he would sometimes get so depressed that he wouldn't even talk to them. Mervin told his friends just before he died of a cerebral hemorrhage that he had been crippled by fear and worry for a long time, which was a big reason why he was drinking so much. He thinks that he still doesn't really know his father, but he loves him at the end of his work. He understands that Mervin was in pain and decides that whatever Mervin did or drank to ease that pain is eventually forgiven. Ondaatje listens to the sounds and smells of home salon on his last morning there in order to remember them. These are the feelings he had as a child and the world his family lives in.
About the author. Michael Ondaatje was born in Colombo in 1943. Ondaatje's parents split up when he was young, so he didn't get to spend much time with his dad. Even though he started school in Ceylon, Ondaatje went to England with his mother when he was 11 years old. As a young adult, he moved to Canada and got his bachelor's degree from the University of Toronto. He then went on to get his master's degree from Queen's University, Ontario. During his time in college, Ondaatje met the famous poet D.G. Jones. Jones saw Ondaatje's promise as a poet and later became his mentor. Ondaatje was also a college professor, but his first book of poetry, The Dainty Monsters, came out in 1967 and launched his literary career. The highly acclaimed The Collected Works of Billy the Kid came out in 1970. Ondaatje kept writing poems, but in 1976, he also put out his first book, Coming Through the Slaughter. In 1978 and 1980, Ondaatje took 2 long trips to Ceylon to see old friends and family and hear their stories about his family's life, especially about his father. He did this to learn more about his own family background. He wrote Running in the Family, an imagined account of his life, in 1982 based on the stories he heard on both trips. In 1987, Ondaatje's book In the Skin of a Lion won him a lot of Canadian literature awards. But it was his novel, The English Patient, in 1992 that really got people talking. It won the Booker Prize and was made into a movie that won the Academy Award for Best Picture. He lives in Canada.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.